Okay, super. So there's quite a few people coming in now, so I'm just going to get going with this, and then obviously people can just join in as and when as we move through the introductions today. So firstly, a very warm welcome to everybody joining us today for our webinar, Are You Ready for the End? Over the course of the next hour, we'll be talking about what we should be doing right now, focusing on the future workplaces might look like, and then take a detailed look at what it means for your people, what the implications on HR are from a legal perspective, and then how do you implement these changes, exchange with your teams, support them, and ensure that you have a positive, flexible workplace for the future. Now, we do know that we will all be returning to the workplace, but there is no one solution that fits us all. I hope that over the next hour, we'll help understand where to start and where you want to be at the end when we do return. So a couple of quick housekeeping notes just before we start. Firstly, it's fantastic to see so many people continue to join the webinar at the moment. So to help with bandwidth and connection, we have disabled all video, audio apart from the speakers today. If you have any questions, please use the chat box. If the question's for a specific speaker, if you can just note and include your name and company, that'd be great. We've got approximately 20 minutes at the end, so we'll try and capture as many questions as we can. As this session is focused on people and the changing workplace, we want to understand how many of you have, over the last 6 months, carried out a staff survey to understand how they feel about the return to the workplace and their expectations. So we're going to run a short poll, which will pop up on your screen now, hopefully. And whilst that's running, I'll do some quick introductions to everybody. So I'm Victoria Walker. I'm the Business Development Director for Space. I'll be chairing the meeting today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Ingrid McGee, who is a partner at Waitmans, along with my colleagues Phil Muir and Mo Gillespie. Phil is the Group Director of Consultancy and Design team, and Phil comes with an architectural background with a focus on workplace consultancy and joined Space about 8 years ago. So Phil's been working with a number of organisations in the past 9 months to help them understand the shape of their workplace and how they're going to return back into the office. Our second speaker today, Ingrid. Ingrid is a partner at national law firm Waitmans and heads up the employment, pension and immigration in Scotland, with many businesses adapting to the workplace environment during the pandemic. Ingrid's assisted many organisations with restructures, reorganisations, change management and implementation of efficiency measures. She is acutely aware of what challenges businesses are currently facing and looks ahead to what should we be doing and preparing for now. And our final speaker today is Mo Gillespie from the Space team. Mo has over 18 years experience in move and change management as a leader in that field. And Mo gets the complexities of change. Her capacity to identify best practice and highlight an efficient process is given a situation, in any situation, is incredibly impressive. So now that the introductions are over, the feedback from the poll should be coming up on my screen now, and I should be able to tell you what results we've got. So interestingly, we've got some good results through here. So I'm sure one of our speakers will pick up on this. So with that in mind, it's over to you, Phil.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. I will just be absolutely certain that I have control of the screen here. Right. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming along. From our perspective as workplace consultants and designers, I'm going to talk today about the post-pandemic future of work in the workplace and take you through some of our most recent experiences. We all know that staff costs are by far the largest cost to businesses, but premises cost money also. So a balance that is both efficient and effective should be the goal of any organisation. A balance of space, that is. Pre-COVID, we had a lot of experience in carrying out space utilisation studies. The charts in the middle of this slide show some sector examples, and without going into a lot of detail, the blue part is empty space. And in our experience, it was not uncommon to see organisations with space unused 50% of the time. In addition to this, the space types were often not appropriate to group sizes they were accommodating. Clients very often tell us that most of their meetings are a maximum of 4 people. Well, you can't get this to match up 100% of the time. Having larger capacity rooms used by between 1 and 4 people mostly is not great use of space. And by understanding demand, there's potentially a more appropriate mix of meeting room sizes. We previously worked, and we hope in future that we will work in groups, both in an organised and ad hoc way. We will work whilst travelling, and we also need time to focus. The photograph of the office there shows rows of desks. You've got people concentrating, you've got people having meetings, people having social discussions, all in this one place in a single type of work setting, which is the desk. Clever office design looks at the activities taking place and provides appropriate space to support these activities. This thinking isn't new, but the experience in working remotely during the pandemic is making more and more clients think that a shared activity-based model is the right solution for their organisation. So I'll show you a case study here for a current client. We did a workplace study for them pre-COVID. At the time, they had more desks than staff, but by going through the consultancy process, they concluded that they needed 184 desks for 200 staff, which is in the region of a 9 to 10 sharing ratio of desks, so 9 desks per 10 people. We recently carried out a similar study with them, same methodology. They wanted to see if their workplace solution would change given their experiences working from home in the past 11 months. The conclusion of this recent exercise was that the client now needed 130 desks for 200 staff, which is more like a 6.5 to 10 sharing ratio. And that was accompanied by a 65% increase in ancillary space, which was made up largely of collaboration spaces, but also some quiet spaces for individual focus. So within the kind of finite parameters of the existing building, you know, the space subdivision has changed. It shows a definite shift towards a blend of home and office working, with the office geared better towards collaboration and teamwork. So, and the key components of a successful office are seen to be quiet space, collaboration space, social space. Most workplaces have previously lent very heavily towards collaboration and sometimes at the expense of concentration. Okay, people can work from home in concentrated tasks, but work from home isn't for everyone, and the idea of the office for collaboration and home for concentration is too rigid and doesn't really reflect the variety of activities that people carry out in a normal day. I do think we need to support concentration better through a mix of appropriate space types and protocols also. This graphic here shows some considerations for designing the post-COVID office, you know, none of which are particularly new, but we see coming to the forefront of people's minds as they consider their next move. Hygiene and scheduling are definitely emerging as key themes. Technology is important, of course, but most clients we speak to moved to home working in March last year fairly easily. They already had the technology to do that. So looking at scheduling, so how do you make sure you get the benefits of increased flexibility? Talking to our clients, we know that people miss aspects of the office like collaboration, organisational identity and belonging, and by and large wish to continue using the office, but with the flexibility to work from home also. Now, while it's nice to think that this might all work naturally, allowing staff to choose their own pattern is fraught with difficulties. So organisations are having to consider how they might schedule office use, setting parameters around time in the office versus home, and potentially looking at core hours to make sure people are available for ad hoc collaboration when that's required. This graphic shows some example staff profiles that range all the way from the home body at home most of the time to the office advocate at the other end of the scale in the office most of the time, and a number of different possibilities in between, with different profiles, different work patterns, potentially different needs for using the office or working from home. Vicky said earlier, there is no one size fits all here, and careful consideration needs to be given to manage this flexibility. Just the slides are stuck here, hold on. That's us. Okay, so this is an example of a recent office planning exercise for a client that the client was previously static with full desk ownership, and this is within their current space. We looked at that. So we applied normal good practice space planning principles, placing the buzzy collaborative areas at the entrance to the space on the right of the plan, and the private work areas at the quieter, lower traffic end of the space on the left. And from their existing situations, there's a clear swing from being desk heavy to a greater balance of shared desks and collaboration space. The 13 square metre per desk metric is not particularly efficient on the face of it, but when you take into account a 6.5 to 10 sharing ratio, this will accommodate 52 staff. So there's a dynamic occupant density of 8.6 square metres per person. With this allocation, the client doesn't anticipate running out of desks, so the office will feel spacious, with spaces to collaborate and concentrate, as well as places to have a coffee and catch up with your colleagues. Again, the design principles are not new, but we're seeing more clients moving towards the belief that their future offices should be designed along similar principles. And this is just a look at what these spaces could be like, moving from arrival and meeting spaces through social space to workspaces. In the arrival space, potentially taking into account more green travel. And although desk ownership may decrease, everyone is likely to need some personal storage. And looking back to understanding meeting requirement group sizes, both internally and with clients, providing appropriately sized and equipped spaces for those meetings. Moving through into the social and meeting spaces, flexibility is a key contributor to high utilisation. The less specialised a space is, the more likely it is to be used for a number of different activities. And well-utilised space has to be the goal. Understanding your needs is the key to all spaces earning their keep. And simple, easily cleaned spaces inspire confidence. And then looking at private workspace, which a reasonably familiar layout, which supports a variety of activities, giving your staff the tools they need to do their jobs. Material and product choices that are influenced by sustainability and an individual's well-being. There are some common themes emerging regarding the future, fears, concerns. Will a blend of home and office get in the way of collaboration? With difficulties meeting in a group that is part physical, part virtual? There's the fear of missing out. Sometimes post-meeting chats can be as valuable as the meeting itself. And will home workers miss out on this benefit? There's a fear from staff of being out of sight and out of mind, and perhaps less visibility, meaning they're passed over for promotion. And also the dissemination of information that was previously done in an office and more recently in video calls with everyone having the same experience, but will the blend mean some people will fall through the cracks and some communication will fall through the cracks? So considerations, we believe that companies need to get prepared for this now, to think about flexibility and the parameters that will give most benefit both to the organisation and the individual. We don't believe that allowing staff complete freedom of choice is going to be manageable, so some compromise will be inevitable. There are relative benefits of home and office. It shouldn't be one or the other, it should be both. And managing how to get teams together for the most benefit and how to schedule this is going to be key. So thank you for listening. I'm now going to hand you over to Ingrid, who will delve deeper into some of these considerations.
Thank you very much, Phil, and good afternoon to you all. I hope lockdown 3.0 is treating you well and you're all in fine spirits today, or as much as you can be in these times. I'm not going to lie, this lockdown has been a struggle, and from speaking to many during this time, I know I'm not alone in that, but it's been a tough one for a variety of reasons, but I am delighted that you've chosen to join us all today for what should be an informative, reassuring and enjoyable session. As Vicky says, I'm a partner at national law firm Waitmans, and I head up the employment, pension and immigration team here in Scotland, and I'm based in Glasgow. When the team at Space Solutions and I discussed the topic for discussion today, and we came up with the kind of theme of planning for the end, I hadn't appreciated perhaps how doomsday that perhaps sounded. But naturally, what we're here to discuss and address today is the end of this period of adaptation, the end of how COVID has impacted how we live and work, and the end of what perhaps just hasn't worked for so many for so long. So in terms of the discussion today, from my own perspective as an employment lawyer, professional life has certainly been demanding, busy and hugely reactive at times. And with all of us getting our heads round, say, the furlough scheme or remote working, a return to work in some form, and then having that taken away again, ourselves and our clients and a lot of our contacts have had to adapt enormously during this time. And in fairness, I think we've all done a fairly good job at it. However, the focus of today's discussion is very much around looking forward and planning ahead. And just yesterday, I was co-hosting a construction roundtable with a group of my fellow partners. And one of the key themes that kept jumping out was the need to plan, and more importantly, to plan early. So today, the plan is to go through what steps I consider are important in preparing for the next stage. And with the vaccine programme making great progress and the hope of some normality creeping into our lives very soon, both personally and professionally, we shouldn't lose sight of how our time can be spent now in preparing for what's next. So what we're going to do today is essentially deal with planning for change. What should you be identifying now? What changes do you think you actually want to make or need to make? What else should you be considering at the moment? And once you've got all that sorted and in your mind, how do you actually go about making those changes? So I'll probably spend a bit of time around this because I think this is a really key stage that, if you haven't already done this, should be done now. And it's essentially the due diligence aspect of any planning strategy. And today, for example, I'd like to focus on, I think, sometimes what could be overlooked. And the first stage, I think, that is worth discussing is in relation to your clients who you deliver your services to. And it's a really good time to understand how you have adapted or not from a client's perspective. I find that sometimes businesses can focus on staff and stakeholders when it comes to how they operate internally within the office. But some of the changes you may have made may be an ongoing expectation for your clients from now on. So don't necessarily assume that you're going to go back to what it was beforehand. So again, today, from now on, it's a really great time to identify what those expectations are, and also to identify what hasn't perhaps worked. We've seen an example, for example, in the retail sector, particularly, those that had a strong and or have subsequently invested in an e-commerce platform have managed to adapt really, really well. So it's worth understanding what your clients' expectations are going forward if you haven't already done that. Don't assume that you're also going to have an ongoing relationship with clients. I've heard from many businesses that think that just because they've managed to keep this business or this relationship during lockdown, that's it cemented going forward. Don't make that assumption just because there's an ease or familiarity and perhaps a lack of appetite to change at the moment. It doesn't mean that it's safe going forward. So don't take that goodwill for granted. Engage now, show you care, you value the relationship, reach out and understand the true value in the service that you can add, and you perhaps have demonstrated in the last 11 months or so, because you need to understand that if it's to be continued going forward, how does that look from your business's perspective in managing what's actually physically capable within the business going forward, and how that marries with what your clients are expecting going forward. In terms of staff, we obviously saw from the engagement, the survey there, perhaps around 34% of us haven't carried out any form of survey. I know something that we've done as a firm, we've done both an engagement survey and a general survey or questionnaire about what the expectations are about when we return to work, when we return to the workplace. For example, we gave our employees a list of would they like to come back 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or no days at all to the office, just to again gauge what their preferences would be, and then for us as a firm to understand what or how we manage their expectations if and when we return to the office environment. We will be returning, but again, how that looks might be different to what it was beforehand. And again, I think many of us will have understood that we've probably missed out in terms of engagement with some of our staff over this time. And though we have Zoom and we have Microsoft Teams, we are losing how we actually work together, how we are collaboratively working. And again, the more junior members of staff, for example, they're really missing out on learning through osmosis. I know when I was a trainee in an NQ, sitting in the office, listening to how other partners or associates were dealing with clients, dealing with legal problems or queries, you learn and you adapt to your own style, but you learn through osmosis. And I think that's something that is missing. So again, in terms of your staff, how have they coped? Do you understand how they've coped? You know, what changes or adaptations have you done that have worked and what haven't? And again, I think it would be a good idea to send out a questionnaire or a survey. And again, we did an engagement survey, an engagement questionnaire as a firm. And what was surprising was how there were completely noticeable differences depending on what stage of the career the individual was, or even the regional responses. So again, I think this section is really highlighting that we shouldn't make assumptions about what we think our staff think or how they think it will look like when they come back. I think there is going to be an expectation for some tweaking. And as Phil said, a complete degree of flexibility is not workable for anybody. But again, you need to understand if there is to be a degree of flexibility, what are the parameters of those? And how do they differ from what you want as a business and how your employees or your staff would expect to return to work? In terms of the stakeholders, again, I think that's a really important due diligence exercise to understand, and it's worth touching base as there may be a slight inconsistency, or there could be perhaps some disjointed views with stakeholders who perhaps think that we'll just return to normal or how it was. So as a business, if anyone's implementing change, or if anyone is implementing some form of tweaking to the working environment or working pattern, that's why the due diligence exercise in terms of what you identify from the client or indeed your staff is important, because if there is any pushback or resistance at stakeholder level, then at least you are equipped from a client and staff perspective to then say, well, this is what the expectations are. And if we do need to make some change, we all need to be on the same page from the word go before you actually start implementing anything. And then I've got this blend section here because that's when, after doing all the due diligence, you should have identified how you perhaps intend to operate going forward. And if there's anything significant that is changing, then at least you know what that's going to look like. And again, if there are competing interests, it's an opportunity for you to identify what they are and how you plan on dealing with them, essentially. So the other reason why this is a really good part of the exercise in any planning for any sort of change when we come back is because at least it's on everyone's radar that potential change, or there's return to work planning, or there's some strategizing ongoing at the moment. I don't think anyone likes surprises. So naturally, if you get them involved, there's a real sense of engagement, you'll get buy-in, and again you get great intel directly from the particular groups that matter when you're making these kind of changes or decisions. It allows you to formulate a plan and a strategy with genuine data and information, and it helps you understand what, if anything, is required to change going forward. And another key aspect is that this helps you in terms of forecasting and timescales. If there are material significant changes that you need to make, and to how you've worked now or how you worked before, you want to kickstart any process required as early as possible, again, to avoid losing valuable time and also the financial impact in any delay in any program for change. So in terms of the next stage of the process and what changes do you want to make, so it doesn't just mean changes to what you had in place beforehand. It could be changes to how you have worked recently. Employees now may be used to this way of working and might not want to come back to exactly what they had pre-COVID times. I know from speaking with many clients and contacts, and those especially in the London area, and the further south you go, the difference in the work-life balance has improved enormously. You might not have individuals who want to come back to that commute. They're saving, 3-4 hours of commuting time by working from home. They're getting to see their children or be with their family, getting to do the school run where they didn't get the chance to do that beforehand. So again, I think there needs to be a really good exercise carried out in understanding and knowing your workforce in terms of what that is important to them and what any potential resistance could be to just coming back into the office pre-COVID times. On the flip side, I think we also need to strike a balance that we don't lose the culture and the collaborative value that you definitely have by having individuals within the workplace at the same time. And as I mentioned, individuals learning through osmosis, especially the more junior or recently recruited individuals, there is a huge loss of opportunity in that way of learning. And again, that needs to be addressed. So in terms of what those changes could be like, you need to identify, is it going to be a form of blended working? I know last week when we were chatting this through, Phil and I had mentioned this hybrid. There might be a view to coming back to work, some working from home, some of the week working within the office. Does that work for your business? If it doesn't, why not? Especially when you've managed to do it the last 11 months. So you need to be clear when you're implementing any change or how you're going to do this, that if you don't want people working from home as much as they have done recently, you need to have really sound business grounds for why you don't want that to continue in this vein going forward as well. So again, or are you going to go back to normal, or are you going to have a complete overhaul? Again, the due diligence exercise just discussed, that should give you a clear indication and a path in how to plan this going forward. I've put there testing and vaccinations as well. I'll come to that later, but again, have you thought about any policies around testing or vaccinations? Is that something you want to consider? If so, how are you going to deal with that and address it? And like I said, I'll come back to that later because there's more to discuss about that. But in terms of your terms and conditions of employment, what I've seen with many clients, and I've assisted with many clients as well, is what do you currently have? What do your contracts and policies currently provide? What parts have worked for you during this time and what haven't? And I've seen as part of restructures or redundancies and efficiency measures, many businesses looking at how their contracts of employment actually work for them now. And I get it. We've been in a pandemic. It's not as if this is, well, touch wood, that we're going to be in this anytime soon. But what it has highlighted is perhaps certain elements that could have made this all a bit easier. And if there were to be any sort of frozen period of employment or something else that came along, then do you have the provisions in your terms and conditions to deal with that? So I've put up on the screen some of the examples that have become a huge talking point within contracts at the moment. For example, layoff and short-time working. If you don't have those provisions in your contract and you seek to lay staff off or place them on short-time working, that is a breach of the employment contract, and that opens you to risk of claims. So do you think you need layoff or short-time working provisions in your contract, in which case you would have to discuss those with the individuals and have to vary their contracts to include them. In terms of flexibility, there's mobility clauses in terms of where the employee works, where you could station them, the job description, the duties, the hours of work. these are all areas within the contract that if they are really defined in the contract, you might not have the flex that you need. And I know with one of my clients in particular, they've built in a 10 to 20% flex up, flex down, for example. So if they didn't have enough work, they have the contractual ability to actually change the hours that are required. And again, then there's a financial benefit there, because then they're not bound to pay for the higher contracted hours if they have that flex. So again, it's worth considering in terms of, what do your current terms and conditions currently provide? Do they work for you? How much flexibility do you need going forward if you do? And then set, again, a period or a timetable in order to implement them. And again, I'll come on to how you would do that later. I've mentioned here in terms of the talent pool and the immigration considerations, I'm not going to touch upon this too much, but all I would say is that obviously with Brexit and the new points-based immigration system, you need to be clear on whether or not you need a sponsorship license now, because it's not the case that we've got the freedom of movement like we used to. Also, you want to ensure that anyone from the EU who remains working with you has applied for, and it has been successful in applying to settle here in the UK. And again, we've got this right to work lacuna where, from an employer's perspective, you want to understand if individuals have the right to work, but there are discriminatory issues in terms of how you identify that. So again, in terms of planning forward, do you need a sponsorship license? Are you clear on what your obligations are? If you are likely to recruit from the EU, right, with the UK, wherever it may be, everyone is treated the same now based on the points-based system. Should you be mapping your job roles, specific duties in respect of these individuals against the immigration points system, so that you're clear on whether or not anyone coming into those roles in the future would require a sponsorship license if they're from out with the UK. So again, I'm just touching upon that because it's part of a wider consideration in terms of planning going forward. But I think in the main, what you want to focus on the here and now in terms of what your terms and conditions currently provide, whether they work for you, and being clear on what it is you want to achieve going forward. So other aspects that I've decided to talk about today, because we're getting a number of queries about this and requests for policies, or queries about if someone doesn't agree to get tested, or if we want to implement vaccinations in terms of we require people to be vaccinated if they want to work here. What options do we have in terms of disciplinary measures or dismissal? So I thought it was worth touching upon during our discussion today, because again, if these are aspects that you want to consider, then you need to think about how you would implement it. I've just seen a question just pop up there. Can an employer force a policy? They can enforce a policy, but they can't enforce you. They can't force you to be vaccinated. They can't force you to be tested. That's not something that's within the employer's powers to do. But they can implement a policy about asymptomatic testing or vaccinations. But it's not as easy to say we're just going to have that. There's a lot of things that need to be considered in implementing or introducing such a policy. What sector are you in? How does your workplace environment, how do your COVID secure measures currently work for you? Is there genuinely a requirement for anything beyond COVID secure measures that you already have in place? I've dealt with some queries about individuals. Well, we've got COVID conspiracy theorists who don't believe that COVID actually exists. They refuse to wear a mask. They refuse to wear a visor. They're not willing to, they're not wanting to, sorry, I just saw another comment there. They don't want to show customers the signposts for wearing masks, for example. And so this individual is now being subject to disciplinary procedures for failing to follow a reasonable and lawful instruction. And I'm wondering, one of the areas to look out for is whether or not there's going to be some sort of philosophical belief ground for any form of discrimination. That in itself is a whole other topic. But I think you all need to have this on your radar, because if you want to implement a policy, you need to be clear on what the parameters are, how are you going to implement it, and you need to be really clear on what you're going to do if they don't comply with it or they refuse to adhere to the policy. So there is guidance out there in terms of asymptomatic testing. Just this week on Tuesday, the Scottish Government published their guidance for employers. The UK government did that in December, but again, it deals with things like what employers need to consider before deciding to test staff. How do you intend to communicate any intention to test staff? What laboratories are you going to use? How are you going to collect COVID-19 samples, tests, and how do you handle samples in transit? So there's a lot of things to consider before you go down that road. But again, it's something that should be on your mind now, because if you want to implement it, you need to know what you need to address at this stage. Again, there's other aspects in terms of discrimination and also data protection, because that's a special category of data you are then processing and storing on behalf of employees. So you might need to update your data protection policy or your privacy notice. And again, we've seen the headlines. We had a bit of a giggle about this, the no jab, no job aspect. We have employers that are really considering this and have implemented it. And again, I think it's very sector dependent, and it will, for example, if you work in a care home, and I think you could understand why such a policy would be implemented in that sector. I don't know, I think we might see a strain of this through, no pun intended, strain of this in manufacturing, or just trying to think what other sectors. Manufacturing might be one of them as well. Just dealing with food, not because of what you're dealing with, but just in the close proximity of how individuals and workers actually work. And given the data is suggesting that the vaccine does lower transmission as well, you can understand again perhaps why some employers might be looking to implement this. Another interesting area I've got up here is wearable technology. Now, I know elsewhere around the world there are businesses that are far more advanced in this kind of aspect than perhaps we are. But wearable technology, I know that some businesses use tracking devices to monitor employee stress levels or sleeping habits. I'm not saying that it's not really caught on in the UK. I don't really know if it will. But in terms of wearable technology and COVID times and planning coming back, I think I'm aware that the BBC, for example, have recently introduced a new proximity device to aid social distancing on its premises. So again, that buzzes to alert wearers if they come within 2 meters of other people. I don't know if anyone on this call is even considering this, but again, it's good for you to have on your periphery in terms of how other businesses are dealing with it, in case it's something you wish to consider, or you actually just wish to say, no, that's just not something we're at all interested in. Again, in terms of the non-compliance aspect, I think from my perspective, this is a key part for any policy, regardless of it's to do with testing the vaccine or whatever it is. If you're going to introduce a policy, you've got to be clear on the parameters, what your expectations are of your staff, but more importantly, what's going to happen if they don't adhere to the policy. So be clear on what will happen or what could happen in your policy. And the other aspect of that, it's all very well having a wonderfully drafted policy, but if you don't implement it or enforce it, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So again, there's an element of training there and awareness that you need to ensure your staff are aware of, because if you have this policy, when someone doesn't keep the 2 meters, or someone gives someone a hug when they're not meant to, if we have all these measures still in place, what are you going to do about it? How hard are you going to come down on non-compliance? Is it the three strikes and you're out, or is it a complete no-no? So be clear on what your expectations are. And there's a whole lead-in time in terms of training and expectations before a policy is implemented, so that individuals are completely aware of what their requirements are, what their obligations are, and how they should adhere to that. So in terms of how do you make these changes, so if you've done your due diligence, you understand you've understood what the client wants, what staff want, perhaps what stakeholders are, and you're looking for what you are going to do going forward. So you need to be clear on the basics. And it might seem really straightforward, but as an advisor who has dealt with many clients about this, this is where it can go wrong. You need to know what the changes are, how significant or material they are, why you're making them, when you intend to implement them, and how you intend to do that. If you don't have all of that known clearly and succinctly for when you are about to roll this out to your staff, it's not going to go as well as it could. And the reason I say that is because whenever there is a period of change, there's pushback, there's uncertainty, there's sometimes distrust. So again, if you're clear on why you're making them and how you're going to do that, then again, that will assist you in your discussions and communication with staff when you're looking to implement change. The key thing here is how you do it. Pushing them through is you're not going to get buy-in. So there's always going to be a period of consultation and informing staff about what is on the horizon and why. So as I've said here, is what works in your favour already. Be clear on that. Like I said, look at your contracts of employment or your policies. Some of the changes you may wish to make, you may have the ability to do that already in your contracts. So there might not need to be this overhaul or massive consultation period as to what you're looking to do. However, I would always recommend and advocate that you consult with staff about any change, even if it's within the contract, because again, it's for buy-in. And two, you may now look to rely on a contractual term that's never been enforced or utilised for years. So again, it's about getting the employees invested in that decision and understanding it and feeling that they're part of the decision-making process. As soon as employees or workers feel that they've got no say or nothing that they have to say will be worthy of listening to or considering, that's when you get individuals being shut off, disgruntled, grievances raised, maybe claims raised. So again, it's really important how you communicate this with staff and how detailed you are. Be transparent, be honest, and be clear again on the basics, as I've said up at the top there. So if you've gone through a period of consultation and you're still getting resistance and individuals don't want to make changes, then I suppose you're kind of left with what options do you have open to you? And I know that I've gone through these processes and procedures with a number of clients in the last few months, and the reason is because some, quite rightly actually, have looked at what they've got in place. They've looked at efficiency measures and they've looked at streamlining staff as well, and they've identified certain things that don't work, they're outdated and they need to change. So they've also looked at what changes to their terms and conditions do they actually need to make. So in that process, they need to understand what the impact is of those changes, and if individuals don't agree to it, what are your options. So unfortunately, if you are clear that these changes need to be made and you're not getting agreement, then one option is to dismiss and re-engage on the new terms that you are proposing. And again, if this affects 20 or more employees within a 90-day period, then collective consultation is triggered. That's really prescriptive. If you've ever been through it, you need to get that right, because if you don't, employees have the right to claim a protective award of 90 days gross pay. That's per employee. So you do not want to get that wrong. I would strongly recommend legal advice if you're going through that kind of process. And you need to be clear on who you need to consult with. So again, in terms of how you get it through, try and get agreement, consult with staff. But if it doesn't work out, then dismiss and re-engage is definitely a possibility and probably your only option at that point. And again, timescales are key. So I appreciate that's a whistle-stop tour of the areas I wanted to cover. I hope you found it really useful and helpful. And naturally, I'll be available at the end if there are any questions, but I shall pass on the mantle to Mo.
Thank you, Ingrid. I'm just going through the technology part here. Just make sure I've got control. Okay, thank you so much, Ingrid. I think you've covered an awful lot there, and obviously it touches so much on actually managing change, which is obviously an area that I'm going to delve into a little bit more. But what I'm planning to do is actually look more at the practicalities of change, particularly in terms of changes to the office environment. Because obviously some of you may be in a position where you're now planning to undertake major workplace changes prior to returning to the office. Others of you might be planning to wait and review your workplace strategy at a later date. And some of you may not know where to start, although hopefully, having listened to Ingrid, you might have a better idea now. But whatever position you're in, I think we can all agree that the return to the office in itself is going to represent a major change, which will require careful management. And as I said, I'd like to highlight some of the sort of more practical areas, which I hope will be relevant and provide a wee bit of food for thought for everybody here. A quick note of caution, and as Ingrid has touched on, you will inevitably experience resistance from some quarters, but hopefully some of the tips that she's given and I'll cover will help you overcome this. I would say, and I would kind of press on people, please don't be deterred. This is normal. Some people just take longer to adjust to the process of change. Obviously, there are real and valid concerns that can be raised and dealt with, but I would say try to keep looking forward and don't look back. So first and foremost, you're absolutely right. You need information to make informed decisions to actually establish the nature of your change. You can't undertake any kind of change management unless you know what that change is. And we've touched on it already, but some of the broad questions to consider obviously include things like, how did we work before coronavirus? How did we cope? What did we learn during this enforced work from home period? What are we planning to do when the offices reopen? What's our vision? How will we operate? And what are the changes required, both physical and behavioural, to achieve the new vision? You really do need to drill down into the detail to understand this. And the staff surveys, which again, we've spoken about in some depth, these will be really important in giving you source information. And proper engagement should help capture the innovations and improvements that have developed as a result of the past year's experiences. And if you're undertaking a workplace strategy exercise, this will obviously give you a much more solid foundation on which to build. It's a good idea to review your existing office environment, even if you're not planning major physical changes at this stage. Minor adjustments can now be very effective, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. I also want to touch further on technology and some key considerations to note there. And I also thought it was probably worth mentioning that this might now be a good time to review where your assets actually are. And I'm talking about desks, office chairs, monitors, many of which are probably now residing in your employees' homes across the country. Do you have sufficient remaining in your actual office to accommodate your plans for reopening? And if not, what are you going to do about it? So to the office itself, and as I said, regardless of where you are in future planning, we do need to address the practicalities first. And I would suggest that your first step should be start preparing the office. I think a lot of offices, we could agree, might resemble the Marie Celeste at the moment, sort of abandoned in March last year and probably haven't had much attention since. I've been unsurprised to learn how well people have been coping without their filing cabinets during this period. So as good preparation for the future, organising a coordinated and COVID compliant programme of clearance now is a good place to start. And the benefit of doing that now is that at the very least, you'll be creating more space, which could be put to much better use in the future. Assuming that there will be a blend of office and home working, it's likely that we'll finally be able to move on from personal desk ownership, and with some exceptions, of course. But it would be a good idea to review the need for anything which anchors individuals to a space, the pedestal, for example, and consider replacing with lockers for flexibility. And you should have room from all the lovely clear outs that you can be doing. Aim to open or reopen the office with that clear desk policy you've been trying to implement for years. Certainly from a hygiene perspective, there's no better time to do it. And really think about how the office will be used. And this is really everything that Phil was talking about earlier, but you need to decide and agree how each existing or proposed work setting will support that. As I say, Phil has described a lot of this, but to implement the changes, we do need to document clearly our decisions and expectations and communicate this properly to the workforce. And again, as Phil touched on, you also need to think about how you will control and manage the office space, ensuring access to those who need it and when they need it. There's a growing consensus that the office will certainly be used as a hub for various reasons, whether that's the face-to-face team meetings or cross-team collaboration. But with a workforce operating both from home and in the office, how can you help flatten those peaks and troughs of usage? You probably don't want the entire workforce turning up on a Wednesday while meeting rooms lie empty on a Monday morning, for example. And that's where technology can help. Booking systems definitely can help in a number of ways. I'm a big fan of this. Firstly, they will help your staff plan and manage their time in the office. They can book space when required and with the colleagues that they need to be with. And most booking systems now are really easy to use and incorporate great functionality such as visitor management, facilities workflows, and reporting tools as well. It'll help FM real estate understand utilization better, and for ongoing health and safety, knowing where your employees are or are supposed to be has its obvious benefits. Teams who wish to get together for specific purposes can ensure they book the relevant space in advance, and system administrators can set up the booking systems to prevent that old school style block bookings far into the future. There are lots of easy and good affordable options right now on the market. And a move to more flexible working or shared desk scenario will necessitate a review of your technology in general. Are your docking stations all the same model, which would allow for any person to dock at any desk, or do you have variations? Do some teams have special tech requirements which would require specific desks to be set aside for their use? Do some teams need multiple monitors? Do you have enough kit to standardize all the desks, and do you want to do this? And with telephony, you might want to consider moving to soft phones if you haven't already. And do your staff have headsets? I mean, we're all so used to chatting on Teams calls all day within the confines of our homes, but can you imagine what a typical day in the future open plan office might sound like? And with meeting rooms, bear in mind that future meetings in the office will very likely comprise a combination of attendees physically in the room plus virtual participants. So you might want to consider making all Teams meeting rooms MS Teams compatible, for example. And a general note about technology, most people have now got at least some experience of using the online platforms such as Teams or Zoom or BlueJeans. It could be worth investing some time in ensuring that you're getting the most out of them, as they do contain a lot of other functions which support collaborative work. And it's possible that a lot of people aren't actually aware of these useful features. And ultimately, you should be aiming to prepare a set of meaningful office protocols which should be communicated properly throughout the organisation prior to the office reopening. And we've touched on a couple of the key areas, such as use of the various work settings, booking systems, and technology in general. But the protocols should also cover any and all new office policies, visitor management, and of course, all health and safety aspects, as well as having defined etiquettes and expected behaviours where appropriate. Because I think this is a really important document that'll help define some of the key behavioural changes required. So while I've touched on some of the main practical changes which should be considered, all of these will elicit a requirement for some form of behavioural change. And contractual changes, obviously, as covered by Ingrid, will form a major component of these new ways of working and will clearly impact behaviours. But we mustn't forget about some of the softer behavioural aspects as well. And I would say, don't assume that everybody has adapted well during this period of enormous change. We're all individuals, and some may need more targeted support going forward. And in fact, some issues may have been exacerbated during lockdown that still need to be addressed. For example, some managers could continue to benefit from guidance in effectively managing remote teams, learning to let go of presenteeism and building trusted relationships. And on the flip side, teams or individual team members might require more support working remotely and might benefit from group workshops where ongoing difficulties can be aired and resolved in comfortable, facilitated environments. When people aren't in the office together all the time, how will you maintain a sense of identity? How will your culture evolve, and what behaviours will support this? Ingrid talked about this as well. How will new starts learn and integrate? What will their experience be? And with a growing focus on well-being and safety in general, What other positive behavioural changes should be encouraged and promoted? And I think what I'm trying to say is that the practical behavioural changes may be easier to document, but the softer changes in behaviours can be harder to identify and fix. But effective change management will help to unearth these potential problems, ensuring the right support can be planned. And finally, having looked at the practical and behavioural aspects of change, and again, Ingrid touched on this, looking at how it's implemented is really important. And firstly, I would say that change has to be led from the top. Having leadership buy-in and support is so important in this, and ensuring consistency of message. This together will greatly improve your chance of effecting change. Having that structured plan to engage with staff is essential, and it must encompass all elements of change that have been determined. And I would also recommend compiling a separate training plan to ensure that the relevant support is planned where required, whether that's upskilling in technology or in the softer skills, such as managing staff remotely, for example. And staff engagement is obviously a two-way process. Embrace the good ideas and feedback and use this to tailor your plans where necessary. Don't ignore objections or resistance, but seek to address valid concerns with modifications. But equally, don't allow a vocal, stubborn few to derail your plans. So do challenge and escalate where necessary. And don't forget that this will be a learning process for everyone. So keep monitoring, keep seeking feedback, and bear in mind that your workplace should and will continually evolve to support the changing priorities of your organisation. Be prepared to be flexible and keep moving forwards. And finally, and again, it's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour from me on change management essentials. I'd just like to leave you with these words, which I like to think of as a more positive take on what's been a very, very challenging year. We've got an opportunity now to harness those better things and to use them as the foundation for our workplaces of the future. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much to all our speakers there. If you could all pop your cameras back on, it'd be lovely to see you. So we've obviously covered a huge amount over the past kind of 45 minutes, and I'm conscious some people might need to go, but you know, we're going to hang on for an extra 5 minutes just to answer a couple of questions. So there's a couple that came up here. One of them was our workforce has reduced, and when we return, we'll have an increased blend of office and working from home mix. So with the spare space, how do we create that kind of buzz, you know, a place for people to come into and better utilise the space? What's our thoughts on that?
I could jump in there, Vicky. Yeah, so I think that is a difficult one when you have a certain amount of space and the feeling that what we're going to have is maybe, you know, less density in the workplace. But I think to go back to the idea of scheduling is like trying to plan for this buzz and bringing this buzz into the workspace. You know, so think carefully about teams and scheduling, getting teams together and actively bring that collaborative energy to the office that may just simply have happened, you know, naturally before. Yeah.
There's one here for you, Ingrid. Can you comment on company duty of care obligations to support or provide, this is probably to all of us, to provide ergonomic equipment for home workers? So there's probably two sides here, one with what it is you're choosing for people being at home and you know, what are your duty of care obligations with response to that?
Duty of care obligations are the same whether you know, if you've got individuals working from home or in the office. So just by way of how we've dealt with it, we sent out a questionnaire. Again, we love questionnaires, but the work. So we asked various questions in terms of what's your workspace like, and we asked about how things were. But the same at the start of this, we sent out everyone with their monitors, their keyboards, and everything else. So in terms of the ergonomic factor, again, it's something to understand what they are, but yeah, you want to make sure that you've got the same standards of work space at home as you would in the office.
Yeah, and Mo, this is maybe one for you, but how can collaboration be done safely when we return to the office? And I suppose this kind of factors in the cleaning aspect as well into the mix here.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, you know, there's a huge link in with facilities who are a massive supporter of the workplace for when we go back. But I think that if we're going back flexibly, we should be aiming for clean, clear environments anyway. People that have been using the offices throughout the pandemic are becoming more used to a bit of ownership in terms of, wiping down desks. This was all normal pre-pandemic as well in flexible offices, where wipes and cleaning wipes and making sure that things were tidied away and clean were done. So I don't think that it's a huge step to ask people to move forward with this, but I think that the question was, will there be a bigger burden on facilities to keep offices clean? And I would say no, because I don't think offices were particularly clean to begin with, and with clear desks it'll be an awful lot easier and targeted for facilities to actually manage the spaces.
Yeah, great. Well, I think we've just probably got time for one more before we wrap up, guys. So one of the other questions, again, Ingrid, this is probably aimed at yourself: how long should a period of consultation last? How many meetings should be held?
At the risk of sounding like a complete lawyer here, the consultation period is as long as is reasonably required, to be honest. So if it's a fairly effective, a simple change that doesn't involve a lot of discussion, then 1 or 2 meetings would be absolutely fine over a week or two. But if you're talking about wholesale changes, significant changes to T's and C's, and again the number that it would impact, as soon as you go over 20 and above, and it might lead to dismissing, re-engage if not agreed, you're into 30 or minimum 45-day periods before the change is implemented. But that doesn't mean that that's a minimum period of consultation, because if it needs beyond that, it's what's reasonable and what's expected to ensure that there's reasonable consultation. So depending on the changes will very much factor into how long the period of consultation will be.
Great. Well, listen, guys, there's loads more questions here, but we are recording the webinar today, so for now, I would like to thank all our speakers, Phil, Mo, and special thanks to yourself, Ingrid, for joining us, and obviously the audience for creating the discussion and thoughts to challenge us further. I think there's a couple of key things there, policies around testing and vaccinations, how much flexibility do you need when you come back to the office, and then how do we communicate to the workforce and control the office space for the future. So we will have the recording available, but please, in the meantime, all our panelists are available to answer any of your further questions, picking up from today's webinar. So thank you again, and have a lovely afternoon.